What if everything we were taught about the age of discovery was wrong? Not slightly wrong, not off by a decade or two, wrong by 300 years. In 1513, a Turkish admiral drew a map so precise, so detailed, so impossible that when modern scientists analyzed it using satellite imagery and sonar data, they went quiet. Because on that map, drawn over 3 centuries before any human being supposedly set foot there, was Antarctica. Not a rough guess, not a symbolic blob, a coastline, in detail, without ice. And that's where our story begins. Tonight, we're going to follow a trail that starts in a dusty Ottoman palace archive in 1929, runs through the frozen edges of the world, winds through ancient libraries that no longer exist, and ends somewhere that makes you seriously question how deep human history really goes. We're going to look at the map itself, line by line. We're going to meet the people who discovered it, the scientists who tested it, and the institutions that quietly stopped asking questions. And we're going to ask the one question that nobody in mainstream history wants to answer. Who taught Piri Reis how to draw a continent that wouldn't be discovered for another 300 years? What you're about to see might not change your textbooks, but it will absolutely change the way you read them. A. The location. Picture this. Istanbul, 1929. A team of scholars is cataloging the Topkapi Palace, the ancient seat of the Ottoman Empire. Room after room of manuscripts, artifacts, forgotten documents. And then, tucked inside a collection of medieval texts, someone unrolls a piece of gazelle skin. It's a map, painted in red, blue, and gold, dated 1513, signed by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. B. The shocking find. At first glance, it looks like a typical Renaissance-era map. Europe, Africa, the new Americas, barely explored at the time. But then your eye drifts south, past the tip of South America, and there it is, a continuous landmass stretching across the bottom of the map, with bays, with mountain ranges, with what appears to be a river system flowing into the sea. Modern cartographers who studied it confirmed the outline matches the subglacial coastline of Antarctica, the coast beneath the ice, with an accuracy that stunned them. Antarctica was officially discovered in 1820. This map was drawn in 1513. C. Why this breaks official history. Here's where it stops making sense. The continent of Antarctica is covered by an ice sheet that in some places is over 2 kilometers thick. We only mapped what's under that ice using ground-penetrating radar, technology we developed in the 20th century. And yet here, on a map drawn by a 16th century admiral, is a coastline that matches our radar data. How do you draw something you've never seen? How do you draw something under the ice without the ice? D. The theories. The first theory is the obvious one, coincidence. The shape is close enough, people are pattern matching, seeing what they want to see. But the second theory is where it gets uncomfortable. Charles Hapgood, a professor at Keene State College, studied the Piri Reis map obsessively in the 1960s, and he came to a conclusion that cost him a lot of credibility in academic circles. The map was copied from source documents that predate known civilization. He believed there existed, before the last ice age, a maritime civilization advanced enough to circumnavigate and precisely map the entire globe. a civilization we have zero record of, that vanished, and left behind only fragments, maps, myths, stone structures we don't understand. He called them the pre-Ice Age seafarers. And he wasn't alone. Albert Einstein wrote him a letter of support, which is either fascinating or completely meaningless depending on how much you trust Einstein's opinion on ancient cartography. E. The scientific response. Modern researchers have pushed back on Hapgood hard. Geographers point out that the southern landmass on the Piri Reis map might actually represent Patagonia, stretched and distorted by the projection method used at the time. 16th-century maps routinely had a Terra Australis, a mythological southern continent that cartographers added because they believed the world needed to be balanced. Land in the north meant land in the south. It was a philosophical guess, not a survey. And honestly, that explanation is completely reasonable. F. The open question. But here's the thing. Piri Reis himself wrote notes in the margins of his map. We can read them. And in those notes, he says he compiled the map from multiple older sources, including maps that were already ancient in his time. Some of those source documents, he says, dated back to Alexander the Great. He wasn't claiming to have sailed there himself, he was claiming to have copied it. So even if we dismiss the Antarctica theory entirely, the question remains, what were the original source maps, and where did they come from? A. The setup. Most people, when they hear about the Piri Reis map, think it's just about Antarctica. But the margins of the map, the handwritten notes, are almost more disturbing than the coastline itself. B. The find. Piri Reis was meticulous. He documented his sources. He wrote about using 20 different reference maps. He mentioned Portuguese charts of the New World. He mentioned ancient Arabic documents. And then he wrote something that researchers have been arguing about for decades. He described lands to the west, what we now know as the Americas, in a way that suggests geographical knowledge that Columbus simply didn't have in 1492. Interior mountain ranges, river systems, details that weren't on any European map for another 50 to 100 years after Piri Reis drew his. C. Why this is strange. If Piri Reis was simply compiling from known sources, Portuguese, Spanish, Arabic, then his map shouldn't contain information those sources didn't have. And yet it does. Which brings us back to the same uncomfortable question. Where was he getting this? D. Theories. Some researchers point to the Library of Alexandria. Before it burned, and it burned multiple times over multiple centuries, it was the greatest repository of human knowledge in the ancient world. Scholars from every civilization brought their texts there. Maps, astronomical records, geographical surveys. What if some of those maps, Phoenician, Egyptian, or older, recorded voyages we have no other evidence of? What if ancient sailors reached Antarctica or the Americas thousands of years before we think they did? And what if the last copies of their records ended up in the hands of Ottoman scholars who didn't fully understand what they were looking at? E. The counter.
The Library of Alexandria is the perfect conspiracy vessel because we know so little about what was actually in it. Historians are quick to point out, we have no evidence any ancient map of Antarctica or the pre-Columbian Americas was ever stored there. We're filling a void with imagination. That's a fair point. F. The question. But here's what's not imagination. The Piri Reis map exists. It's in Istanbul. You can go see it. The notes in the margins exist, translated and published. And the accuracy of certain features that shouldn't be there, has been confirmed by multiple independent researchers. The document is real. The mystery is real. What we're arguing about is the explanation. A. The setup. Let's talk about Charles Hapgood because his story is as strange as the map itself. He wasn't a fringe character. He was a professor, a serious academic. And the Piri Reis map destroyed his career. Slowly, quietly, the way academia punishes people who ask the wrong questions. B. The find. Hapgood spent years analyzing not just the Piri Reis map, but dozens of other ancient maps. The Orontius Phineus map of 1531, the Buache map of 1737, all of which appeared to show Antarctica in various forms of detail. He had his students at Keene State perform mathematical analysis on the projections used, and they concluded that whoever originally drew the source maps was using a level of spherical trigonometry not officially developed until the Renaissance. The mathematics to make certain ancient maps shouldn't have existed when those maps were supposedly made. C. Why it's unsettling. If Hapgood was right, even partially right, the implications are enormous. It would mean there existed, before our recorded history, a civilization with ocean-going vessels capable of global navigation, mathematical knowledge centuries ahead of its supposed discovery, and a systematic interest in mapping the entire planet. And then, nothing. They vanish. No cities we can clearly identify, no writing we can decipher, no direct descendants who remember them. Just maps, and myths, and structures we don't understand. D.
Theories. This is the foundation of what's sometimes called the lost civilization hypothesis. Graham Hancock built an entire career on a version of this idea. Randall Carlson connected it to the Younger Dryas impact, a catastrophic period of rapid climate change around 12,000 years ago, potentially triggered by a comet impact that ended the last ice age almost overnight in geological terms. The theory: a global cataclysm wiped out an advanced civilization. Sea levels rose by 120 meters. Coastlines vanished. Survivors scattered, carrying fragments of knowledge, mathematics, astronomy, cartography, into the cultures we do have records of. Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley. Maybe what we call the dawn of civilization was actually the echo of one. E. The scientific view. Mainstream archaeology is deeply skeptical. The absence of physical evidence, cities, tools, DNA markers, is a massive problem for the lost civilization theory. You can't erase a global civilization so completely that you leave no trace beyond a few ambiguous maps. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis itself is contested. Some geologists support it, others don't. And Hapgood's mathematical analysis, while interesting, has been criticized as relying on selective data, choosing the features that fit his theory and ignoring the ones that don't. F. The question. But here's what Hapgood said before he died. He said he didn't need anyone to believe in a lost civilization. He just needed someone to explain the maps, not dismiss them, explain them. And in 60 years, no one has done that completely. A. The setup. Here's the part of this story that genuinely unsettles scientists who study it carefully. Not the map, not the theories, the ice. B. The find. In 1958, a team of scientists conducting seismic surveys of Antarctica produced the first detailed map of the continent's subglacial topography, what the land looks like under the ice. When researcher Arlington Mallory compared this map to the Piri Reis version in the 1950s, he found correlations in the coastal outline that were, statistically, difficult to dismiss as coincidence. More recently, the BedMap 2 project, a comprehensive 2013 survey using modern geophysical technology, gave us the most accurate picture yet of Antarctica beneath the ice. And researchers who have gone back to compare it with the 1513 map don't talk about it simply. C. Why this matters. The West Antarctic coastline on the Piri Reis map shows features, bays, inlets, a specific curved peninsula, that correspond to the subglacial coast revealed by BedMap 2. These aren't vague similarities. Some of them are specific. How do you accidentally draw specific features of a coastline buried under 2 kilometers of ice, 500 years before we had the tools to see through the ice? D. The theories. Option 1. The map was drawn when Antarctica was ice-free. The last time Antarctica had a significantly ice-free coast was approximately 6,000 years ago, and some estimates push it back to 12,000 or even further. If the source maps predate the ice, if they were drawn by a civilization that existed before the ice sheet fully formed, then we're looking at geographical knowledge from a culture that predates ancient Egypt. Option 2. The similarity is overstated. Human brains find patterns. We see faces in clouds. Maybe we're seeing Antarctica where it isn't. E. The scientific response. The scientific community has largely moved on from the Piri Reis map as a serious research object. And that in itself is interesting. Not because moving on is wrong, science moves toward productive questions, but because moving on sometimes looks identical to not wanting to deal with the implications. F. The question. The ice over Antarctica has been building for at least 34 million years. In localized coastal areas, fluctuations have occurred. In the last 12,000 years, sea levels changed dramatically. Some coastal areas that are now under ice were once, briefly, more exposed. Briefly, 12,000 years ago. Is that enough time for a sophisticated civilization to survey the coastline, record it, and pass that record down through thousands of years of history until it ended up on gazelle skin in 1513? Maybe not, but somebody drew it. There's something deeply human about the Piri Reis map, not the mystery of it, the need of it. We want there to be more to history than what we've been taught. We want there to have been people before us who understood the world, perhaps understood it better than we do, who sailed its oceans, mapped its edges, and somehow failed to survive long enough for us to remember their names. That longing isn't weakness, it's curiosity. And curiosity is the engine of every real discovery. Here's what we know for certain. The map exists. It is from 1513. It contains features that shouldn't be there. The man who drew it said he copied from older sources. Some of those sources may have come from libraries that no longer exist. And the features in question correspond, sometimes with uncomfortable precision, to a coastline that was buried under ice when Piri Reis was born. Here's what we don't know. Why? Not really. Not completely. Maybe the explanation is simple. A projection trick. A philosophical convention. A lucky guess built on centuries of rumor and myth. Or maybe, and this is the thought that keeps some very serious researchers up at night, maybe we are not the first civilization to have figured this out. Maybe someone, a very long time ago, stood at the edge of a cold and windswept coast, looked out at the ice forming on the horizon, and understood, with perfect clarity, exactly where they were. And they wrote it down, and the writing survived, and we're holding it in our hands. And we still don't know what it means.